The glass of attic antiques on Church Street holds the soft morning light, and the Trevaline case is open before you tonight, page by page, after the shop. Settle in gently, because nothing in this file moves quickly now, and we can let the old paper rest under our hands. You begin in Llangollen, in North Wales, on the 16th of June 1990, when the town was busy, the pavements were warm, and Trevaline Evans opened her little antique shop as she usually did. You can picture the shop front if you like, quiet and narrow, with the faint smell of polish, old wood, folded cloth, and brass warmed by the sun. Inside attic antiques, there would have been small objects waiting in their places, each one carrying somebody else's earlier life: a chair with rubbed arms, a jug with a pale glaze, a frame with dust gathered softly along the edge. The Trevaline case begins in that ordinary stillness, when nothing looks like a beginning at all. Trevaline Evans was 52 years old, a wife, a mother, and a grandmother, known around Llangollen as someone steady and sociable. When you read the older descriptions of her, you don't find a person stepping away from her life in any obvious way. You find someone who spoke to friends that morning, who seemed relaxed, and who had ordinary plans. That matters as you turn the page slowly, because cold cases often grow around the smallest contrast, the calm morning beside the unanswered afternoon. She had been away earlier that week, near Rhuddlan, where she and her husband, Richard, had been working on a holiday bungalow. Then she returned to Llangollen, back to the shop, back to the familiar rhythm of keys, counters, customers, and local streets. You can almost hear the small bell at the door, though the file doesn't need to say it. Some details belong to places like this. They gather in the mind because we know how shops sound when a town is awake. On that Saturday, Trevaline opened Attic Antiques at about 9:30 in the morning. Her dark blue Ford Escort estate was parked some distance away, not right outside the door, and that little fact would sit quietly in the file for years. Her handbag was in the shop. Her car keys were there too. Her jacket remained behind, along with flowers and fruit that seemed intended for home. These are not dramatic objects. They are only the ordinary things a person expects to return to. As you sit with this first folder, you notice how many people saw her in the early part of the day. Friends and customers came in, perhaps 20 or more across the morning, and the town itself was full of weekend movement. Llangollen was not empty. The roads were not silent. The case did not begin in darkness, but in daylight, among footsteps, passing voices, shop windows, and the mild clatter of a Saturday that other people would later remember as simply busy. That is one reason the Trevaline Evans disappearance has always felt so difficult to hold. It happened where people were present, yet the decisive space stayed unwitnessed. You and I can sit beside the file and feel that quiet frustration without forcing it into shape. Detectives had witnesses, times, places, and items left behind. What they did not have was the one clear moment that explained why a woman who meant to come back did not come back. By about 20-1, Trevaline left a short note on the door of Attic Antiques. It said she would be back in 2 minutes. You can imagine the paper there. Simple and practical. Not written for history, not written to puzzle anyone. It was the sort of message a shopkeeper leaves when she expects only a brief errand. The phrase has stayed with the case because it is so small. It doesn't sound like departure, it sounds like a pause. Before that note was placed, a smartly dressed man was reportedly seen speaking with her in the shop. In some accounts, he is described with a blazer, formal enough to be noticed, ordinary enough to vanish back into memory. You can feel how carefully investigators must have handled that detail. A person seen talking to a missing woman matters, but memory is fragile, and a busy tourist town can fill itself with strangers who leave no name behind. The man was never traced, at least not in a way that resolved the matter. An artist's impression was made and circulated during the original investigation, because that was one of the tools the police had then. Before digital cameras sat in every pocket, before every shopfront gathered hours of video, a likeness depended on witness memory, pencil work, and paper copies pinned in public places. You can hear the photocopier's warm hum in that older world. You can smell the toner and rain-damp coats in the station corridor. After leaving the note, Trevaline was known to have bought fruit, an apple, and a banana, and she was seen crossing Castle Street nearby. The detail feels almost too ordinary to bear much weight, but in a cold file, ordinary things become markers. You place the fruit on the timeline. You place Castle Street beside Church Street. You let the streets lie flat in your mind, and you try to see how a short errand could become a lasting absence. There was, later, a banana skin found in a bin inside the shop, which led to the thought that she may have returned after buying the fruit. But that return has never been settled in the clean way a detective would want. You can feel the uncertainty in the paper itself, almost like a softened crease. If she returned, then the shop held one more small moment before she was gone. If she did not, then the banana skin belongs to some other explanation, less helpful and less clear. This is where the Trevaline case begins to slow down, not because investigators lacked effort, but because the known facts started leaving spaces between them. A note on a door, fruit bought nearby, a possible return, a handbag left behind, keys still in the shop, a car still parked where it had been parked. Each piece was real enough to write down, yet none of them opened the locked center of the afternoon. You turn the page, and the sound of Llangollen changes slightly. The morning customers have passed through. The shop door is still. Somewhere beyond the town center, the River Dee moves in its own time, indifferent and soft against the stones. Detectives would later search water, paths, mines, caves, and wooded places. But at this early hour the case is still close to the counter, close to the note, close to the small domestic objects Trevaline did not take with her. By 2:30, there was a confirmed sighting of Trevaline near her home on Market Street. This detail gently widens the map. We are no longer only inside attic antiques, and you can feel the file asking you to lift your eyes from the counter and follow the streets outward. Market Street was familiar ground. Home was nearby. The sighting does not explain the disappearance, but it tells us she was still within the known places of her life. A few minutes later, there was an unconfirmed sighting of a woman matching her description, walking out of town along the A5 towards Corwen, near the Riverside Park. Later still, another possible sighting placed a similar woman near Park Avenue, from the direction of the River Dee. You hold these gently, because unconfirmed sightings can be both useful and misleading. They are human attempts to help. They are also made of memory, weather, distance, and the strange pressure of realizing later that a moment might have mattered. This is one of the patient lessons inside the Trevaline Evans file. A witness may see something clearly and still not know its importance until hours or days have passed. A woman walking, a familiar build, a coat, a pace, a direction. You can imagine someone standing in a kitchen later, the radio speaking of a missing shopkeeper, and feeling an old image rise slowly from the afternoon. That is how investigations gather, not all at once, but in returns. At about 11 that night, Richard Evans reported his wife missing. By then, the soft certainty of ordinary delay had fallen away. You can imagine the shop no longer as a warm morning place, but as an after-hours room with objects still waiting in rows. The handbag had not gone. The keys had not gone. The jacket had not gone. A person may leave many things behind for a short errand, but by night, those things begin to speak more heavily. The first search work began with urgency, though we can tell it here quietly. Police went through the town and the surrounding area, asking questions, taking statements, and walking the same ground that had seemed harmless that morning. You can feel the change underfoot, from ordinary pavement to measured search route. The day had been sunny, but by the time people were looking, the light had altered. Shadows lengthen differently when a town knows someone is missing. Every household in Llangollen was eventually approached, and more people from farther away were also spoken to. Over time, more than 1,500 names were checked, and hundreds of cars were eliminated from the inquiry. You can picture the lists, long columns of names, addresses, number plates, and times, all written or typed with careful effort. This is the slow labor that cold cases are built from. Not a single brilliant answer, but page after page of elimination. The investigators searched the River Dee, the canal, nearby caves, old mine shafts, and the rougher edges of the landscape around Llangollen. If you sit with a map, you begin to understand the difficulty. The town is beautiful, but beauty can complicate a search. Water moves, hills fold into shadows, old workings and footpaths hold pockets of silence. A searcher can come home with mud on their boots, cold in their hands, and still have no clearer answer than when they began. In the shop, the evidence was quiet. That is part of why the case went cold after Attic Antiques. There was no obvious scene that explained everything. There was no sign that the missing items had been gathered for a planned departure. There was no movement in her bank account afterward, which suggested she had not simply gone on with another life under her own means. You read that fact slowly, because financial silence is one of the heaviest silences in a missing person file. The note remained one of the central objects in memory. Back in 2 minutes, you can almost see a detective reading it again under a desk lamp, hearing the phrase become more painful because it is so casual. If a person writes that, she expects return. If a shopkeeper leaves a handbag, keys, jacket, and car, she expects return. If a shopkeeper leaves a handbag, keys, jacket, and car, she expects return. Yet expectation is not evidence by itself. It only tells us what the scene seemed to believe before the afternoon changed. What made the investigation so difficult was not the absence of information, but the nature of it. There were many small facts, but they did not lock together. A possible man in the shop, a fruit purchase, a possible return, a confirmed sighting near home, other possible sightings by the road and river. You can lay them out on the table, one beside another, and still feel the gap between them, cool as archive air. Years later, when people asked why the Trevaline case went cold, the answer was not one simple failure. It was the sum of many limits. The time period mattered, the town's busyness mattered, the absence of cameras mattered, the uncertainty of sightings mattered, the lack of a body, confession, clear motive, or reliable final witness mattered. Patient detectives can work for years with fragments, but fragments do not always become a door. You can imagine the first weeks after the disappearance as a room full of sound, telephones ringing, statements being typed, people arriving at the station with something they remembered, officers coming back from searches with damp hems and tired eyes. The file would have smelled of paper, ink, tobacco on old coats, and the faint metallic tang of filing cabinets. Even in a calm retelling, we should honor that work, because searching is a human act before it is a procedural one. The people of Llangollen must have carried the case in their own quiet ways. A shop passed on Church Street, a remembered face behind the counter, a conversation from the Saturday morning replayed over tea. You and I, looking back, have the strange advantage of knowing the case would remain unsolved. But the people living inside those first days did not know that yet. They were still waiting for the ordinary ending, the phone call, the explanation, the return. And as the first bright searches became later inquiries, the file began its long change from urgent missing person investigation into cold case, though nobody would have wanted to call it that too soon. Coldness in a case is not indifference. It is the cooling of fresh traces, the fading of exact memory, the way paper replaces footsteps. You feel that as you turn another page. The shop is still there in the record, but the door has stopped opening. The man seen speaking with Trevaline became one of the details people return to often. You can understand why. A stranger is easier for the mind to hold than an empty space. He gives the afternoon a shape, or seems to. But good investigators have to be careful with shapes that memory supplies. A person may be important, or merely present. A blazer may stand out because it was unusual, or because later fear made it sharper. The artist's impression was circulated in 1990, and people were asked whether they knew him. You can picture the drawing in a newspaper. The face reduced to lines and shading. The public invited to search its own memory. That was a familiar method in the years before quick digital sharing. The paper would pass from hand to hand. Someone might leave it on a cafe table, or fold it beside a till, glancing back at the eyes in the sketch. But years later, police would say that the published artist's impression was no longer considered accurate. That, too, is part of the reason the case went cold. A lead can seem solid in the first season of an investigation, then soften under later review. You sit with that change, not as a scandal, but as a reminder of how hard memory can be to preserve. Detectives inherit not only evidence, but earlier uncertainty. When a cold case is reopened, it is often because time has given investigators new tools. In 2001, the Trevaline Evans case was looked at again, with hope that newer forensic methods might help. You can imagine the old boxes being lifted from storage, the cardboard slightly softened at the corners, the labels faded but still legible. Inside, the past does not wake dramatically. It waits in envelopes, photographs, statements, and notes made by people who may already have retired. The reopening did not solve the case. Richard Evans was arrested that year and later released without charge. In a calm file, that sentence must be handled carefully. An arrest is not a conviction, and being released without charge matters. You and I do not need to turn uncertainty into accusation. We only note that investigators explored what they felt they had to explore, and that the inquiry still did not reach an answer. By then, more than a decade had passed since the shop door carried its small note. 11 years can change a town. People move house. Shops alter their windows. Memories settle into stories, and stories sometimes gather polish from being repeated. A detective returning to the Trevaline case in 2001 would have been working with both the original paper record and the human difficulty of time. The paper might stay still, but people never do. The searches and inquiries had already been wide. The River Dee had been considered. The canal had been considered. Mine shafts and caves had been searched. Vehicles had been checked, names compared, sightings weighed, and possible routes walked. Yet nothing found its way back to Trevaline. That phrase, "nothing found its way back," is one of the quietest burdens in this file. Evidence sometimes stays absent, no matter how patiently people look. You can feel the old landscape around Llangollen pressing gently against the investigation. The river, the bridge, the roads out toward Corwen, the folds of green ground beyond town. In a city, a missing person file often fills with cameras, transport records, and crowds. In this place, and in that time, the investigation depended more heavily on observation, memory, and search. Those are deeply human tools, but they are not perfect ones. And then there are the ordinary items left behind: the handbag, the car keys, the jacket, the car itself, still parked where she had left it. You return to them because investigators return to them. They are anchors. They say Trevaline did not appear to prepare for a long absence. They say the shop was meant to be resumed. But they do not say what interrupted that intention. And that is where the file keeps its silence. A cold case often grows cold at the point where intention and event separate. We can see what a person seemed to intend, but not what happened next. Trevaline seemed to intend a brief absence from the shop. The note said so, the belongings said so, the Saturday morning said so. But the event, whatever it was, stepped outside the available record. You can sit with that without forcing a conclusion, and that is part of patient detective work. Later reports mentioned possible sightings far beyond Wales. including London, France, and even Australia. These are not unusual in long missing person cases. The farther time stretches, the farther the map can seem to stretch with it. You can imagine envelopes arriving, phone messages being written down, a name passed across a desk because someone saw a woman in a crowd and wondered. Hope and uncertainty often travel together in such reports. Interpol was reportedly involved with an assumed sighting in France, which shows how wide the search for Trevaline could become. But none of those possible sightings resolved the case. You can feel how each one might have briefly warmed the file, only for the warmth to fade again. That is another kind of patience. Investigators have to check what can be checked, while knowing many leads will return only to quiet. There were also searches prompted by unusual claims and private impressions. In the early 1990s, woodland in the World's End area was searched after a tip connected to a person claiming spiritual insight. Another report led to sniffer dogs searching near the canal bank. We can mention these gently, because desperate uncertainty often invites unlikely routes. Families and investigators may listen to things they would not otherwise consider, not because they abandon reason, but because absence is hard to bear. Still, the central problem remained close to the shop. Why did Trevaline leave? Did she return after buying fruit? Who, if anyone, accompanied her? What happened between the ordinary note and the confirmed sighting near Market Street? If the later sightings were truly her, why was she walking where she was seen? If they were not, then where did her path end? You and I can ask these questions softly, because the file has asked them for decades. The Trevaline case went cold after the shop because the shop was full of signs of return, but not full of answers. That is the simplest way to say it. Attic Antiques held her belongings, yet not the reason she left them. The town held witnesses, yet not the witness who saw the whole thing. The landscape held search areas, yet not the trace that would bring certainty. The investigation had motion, but the center stayed still. When you look at the chronology, you can feel how much depends on small intervals. 9:30, the shop opens. Around 20 to 1, the note appears. Fruit is bought. Castle Street is crossed. By 2:30, Trevaline is seen near home. Then there are possible sightings, uncertain and fragile. Each time has a place beside it, but between the times are stretches of unlit space, and the detective's work is to sit with those spaces without pretending they are smaller than they are. There is a softness to old files that can be misleading. The paper yellows, the ink fades, and the photographs begin to look like artifacts from another country. But every line once belonged to a living day. The morning air was real. The shop counter was real. Trevaline's hands moving among ordinary things were real. We keep that in mind, because a cold case should never become only a puzzle. It is first a life interrupted, and then a community left waiting. As the years passed, anniversaries brought renewed appeals. 20 years, 25 years, more. Each appeal asked for someone to remember, or reconsider, or speak at last. You can imagine the same few details being printed again. The note on the door, the fruit, the car, the handbag, the last confirmed sighting. Repetition can feel wearying, but it is also one of the tools families and police still have when the trail is old. They keep the name in the air. To keep saying Trevaline Evans is to refuse the complete closing of the file. It is a small act, but not a small kindness. Names can fade when answers do not come, so the case is brought back into public view, again and again, not with noise, but with the hope that memory may shift. Someone may have been young then, and older now. Someone may have heard something. Someone may have misunderstood the importance of a detail. The quiet difficulty is that memory does not only return, it also changes. A person might sincerely believe they saw something after learning more about the case. Another might dismiss a real memory because it seems too small. Detectives working cold cases must sort through both possibilities with care. You can picture them reading statements at a desk, the window dark outside, a mug cooling beside the file, and every sentence asking for patience. In the Trevaline case, patience has not meant progress in the way people most want. No one has been charged. Trevaline has never been found. The answer has not arrived. Those facts belong later in the script too, and we will return to them gently when the night grows quieter. For now, we stay in the middle of the file, where the investigation keeps circling the shop, the street, the fruit, the note, and the unexplained movement of an ordinary Saturday. Because after the first searches, the case was not abandoned. It was worked, reviewed, reopened, discussed, and carried by people who did not forget. That distinction matters. A case can go cold even when effort remains. Cold means the leads stop producing new ground. Cold means the known evidence has been asked many questions, and it gives back no more than before. Cold means the file is still present, but the path forward has narrowed to almost nothing. You can feel that narrowing in the way later theories attach themselves to the case. Some people wondered about strangers, some wondered about familiar people, some looked toward other offenders in the wider region. Some tried to connect Trevaline's disappearance to men later convicted of other serious crimes. Investigators considered possibilities, and in some instances ruled them out. But a theory is not the same as proof, and proof is what the file never found. Robin Ligas was one such name explored in later years, because of other crimes and a possible pattern people thought might matter. Police considered a possible connection, then ruled it out. Christopher Hallowell was also discussed in later media, with suggestions and comparisons. But no proven link settled the case. You can hold those names lightly, because the heart of the Trevaline file remains Trevaline herself, not the gravitational pull of other histories. This is important for a quiet retelling. We do not need to borrow darkness from elsewhere. The mystery is already difficult enough in its own small rooms. An antique shop, a note, a woman known in her town, a Saturday that did not close properly. If you are the detective tonight, reading by a small lamp, you keep your pencil near the facts. You let speculation stay in the margins where it belongs. The file also asks us to think about time before constant surveillance. In 1990, a person could cross a street without being recorded. A stranger could enter a shop and leave only a memory. A car could pass without a plate being captured automatically. Receipts might be paper. Phone calls might leave no easy trail. The world was not empty of records, but it was thinner, and missing person investigations had to lean on human notice. Human notice is tender but uneven. One customer remembers Trevaline being cheerful. Another remembers the town being busy. Someone sees a woman near Market Street. Someone else may have seen a similar figure by the riverside. The investigation becomes a woven thing, made from many threads of different strength. You can run your hand across it and feel where it holds and where it loosens. Attic Antiques itself becomes almost another witness, though a silent one. It held the jacket, the keys, the handbag, the fruit and flowers. It held the bin with the banana skin. It held whatever arrangement of objects Trevaline left behind when she stepped away. But a room cannot explain its own silence. Detectives can photograph it, search it, dust it, measure it, and list what remains. After that, the room gives only atmosphere. You can imagine dust in the corners, the smell of varnished wood, the faint chill that old shops can hold even on bright days. There may have been sunlight in the window and shadow under the shelves. There may have been the low murmur of traffic from Church Street. These details do not solve anything, but they keep us close to the human scale of the case. Without them, the file becomes too clean, too abstract, too far from Trevaline's last known ordinary hours. And so we sit with the shop a little longer, because the title asks why the case went cold after the shop, and the answer is hidden in that phrase. After the shop, certainty thinned. After the shop, the timeline depended on sightings and interpretation. After the shop, objects stayed behind, but Trevaline did not. After the shop, the investigation had to move from a room full of belongings into a town full of possibilities. That movement is hard for any inquiry. A room can be controlled. Streets cannot. A counter can be examined. A riverside path cannot remember who passed. A note can be kept in evidence. A brief conversation between two people may vanish unless someone else heard it clearly. You can feel the detectives moving from the manageable to the open, from polished wood and paper to sunlight, traffic, river air, and the wide green distance beyond Llangollen. The day itself may have worked against them simply by being pleasant and busy. A sunny Saturday brings visitors, shoppers, walkers, passing cars, and people who do not expect to remember every face. In a quieter street, a stranger might stand out more sharply. In a busy town, he becomes one figure among many. You can hear the soft complication of that, the way ordinary life can shelter the very detail someone later needs. When witnesses were interviewed, they gave what they could. Some accounts were strong enough to become part of the central timeline. Others remained possible but uncertain. Investigators had to decide which details to prioritize, which to test, and which to keep in the file without leaning too hard on them. That kind of judgment is patient work. It has no glamour. It is one page read against another, one memory compared with time, one small correction made in pencil. The confirmed sighting near Market Street at 2:30 is one of those stronger points. You return to it because it extends Trevaline's known day beyond the first errand from the shop. Yet even there, the file does not become simple. If she was near home, why were her things still at Attic Antiques? Was she moving between familiar places for some ordinary reason? Did she intend to go back? We can ask, but we cannot make the answer appear. The possible sighting near the A5 toward Corwin opens another line. A road out of town is a different kind of place from a shop counter. It suggests movement, or at least the appearance of movement, toward a wider landscape, but because it was not confirmed, it remains in that careful middle ground. You do not discard it. You do not build everything on it. You let it rest where investigators left it, marked but unresolved. The later possible sighting near Park Avenue, from the direction of the River Dee, adds another soft complication. Rivers draw attention in missing person cases because they move through towns with quiet persistence. Searchers looked along water, as they often must, but the river did not return an answer. You can imagine its sound at evening, low and continuous, while people searched banks and paths with the hope that some sign would appear. No sign appeared that settled the matter. That is the phrase cold cases keep teaching us. Not no effort, not no care, no settling sign. The investigators searched places where evidence might have been lost or hidden. They spoke to households. They checked vehicles. They followed sightings beyond the town and even beyond the country. Yet the case stayed open, waiting in the quiet way old files wait. For sleep, we can let this waiting become the rhythm of the telling. You turn a page. You pause. You return to the note. You listen to rain that may not have fallen that day, but seems to belong to the archive now, tapping faintly on some later window. The case does not hurry you. It has been here for more than 3 decades. It will not change because we read faster. And in that slow reading, you begin to see that the Trevaline Evans case went cold not because it was empty, but because it was full of almosts. Almost a clear final route. Almost a traceable man. Almost a confirmed return to the shop. Almost a sighting that might have explained her direction. Almost a theory that might have joined the pieces. The word almost is soft, but in an investigation it can be heavy. The family lived with more than almost. They lived with absence. Her brother, her relatives, her friends, and the people who knew her in Llangollen had to move through ordinary years while the question stayed where it was. You can imagine birthdays passing, shops changing hands, local voices aging, and still the name Trevaline returning whenever the case appeared in the paper. That is the human element beneath every file. Time moves, but not evenly for everyone. For detectives, too, an unsolved case can become a companion of sorts, not wanted, but never fully gone. An officer may retire and still remember a note on a shop door. Another may recall searching a riverbank. Another may remember the face in an artist's impression, later set aside. These fragments stay with people because they asked so much and gave so little back. Patient detective work is often the art of carrying unanswered things without letting them become careless. When the case was reopened, those older efforts had to be respected and re-examined at once. New eyes may catch what old eyes missed, but new eyes also inherit the limitations of the original moment. If evidence was not collected in a way modern methods require, time cannot always repair that. If a witness was uncertain then, they may be more uncertain now. If a shop held no decisive trace, decades will not easily create one. Still, reopening matters. It says the file is not forgotten. It says the name still deserves care. In 2001, investigators hoped newer forensic possibilities might help, and even though no resolution came, the act of looking again carried meaning. You can picture the evidence being reviewed beneath fluorescent light, each item handled with the careful quiet of people who know that old things can still matter. By the 20th anniversary, public appeals again asked for information. The date itself, the 16th of June, carries a gentle weight in the file. Each year it returns. People who were children in 1990 become adults. People who were middle-aged become elderly. The town changes, but the anniversary keeps opening the same drawer. Inside it are the note, the fruit, the shop, the sightings, and the unanswered question of why. This is where we begin to understand coldness as a condition, rather than an ending. The case is not closed in the moral sense. It is not finished in the human sense. It is cold because the available leads have cooled, because the heat of immediate witness memory has faded, and because the facts that remain have been examined many times without yielding a final path. The file is still open, but the road through it is quiet. You, sitting with the file tonight, can feel the difference between uncertainty and mystery as entertainment. This is not a riddle made for us. It is a life that did not come home, and a shop that never received its owner back. The calmness of the telling is not distance, it is respect. We lower our voices because the people in the case were real, and because unanswered grief should never be made loud for its own sake. So we return, once more, to attic antiques. The door, the counter, the objects, the note promising only 2 minutes. Perhaps a customer came by and read it, then came back later and found the same message still there. Perhaps the afternoon light changed across the glass. Perhaps dust shifted in a sunbeam above a shelf of china. These are imagined textures around known facts, and they help us stay near the scene without inventing answers. The known facts are enough to sit with. Trevaline Evans opened her shop in Llangollen on the 16th of June 1990. She was seen by friends and customers that morning and seemed well. Around 20 to 1, the note went up. She bought fruit nearby. Her belongings remained in the shop. She was later seen near Market Street. Other sightings were possible, but not confirmed. Searches and inquiries followed, but no trace was found. That paragraph of facts has been rearranged many times in many minds. Detectives have held it. Journalists have retold it. Family members have lived beside it. Listeners like you may hear it now in the hush before sleep, not to solve it tonight, but to understand why it has resisted solving. The order is clear enough. The meaning is not. And between order and meaning, the case has rested for years. When a case goes cold, people sometimes imagine a door closing, but in reality, it can feel more like a hallway growing longer. The file remains accessible. The questions remain written down. The people who care still care. Yet each step takes more effort, because every new lead has to cross a distance of years. A memory from 1990 must travel through all the living that came after it, and still arrive intact enough to help. That is why investigators often return to public appeals. They know someone might have kept a detail out of fear, embarrassment, loyalty, confusion, or the simple belief that it did not matter. Over time, those reasons can change. Relationships change. Burdens change. A person who stayed silent once may decide, years later, to speak. In old cases, patience is not passive. It is an active waiting, a careful keeping of the door unlatched. But the Trevaline file has waited a long time. It has absorbed many theories without becoming solved. It has seen searches of land and water, reviews of old evidence, appeals to memory, and examinations of possible links. None has brought Trevaline home. None has answered why the shop was left with its ordinary things still inside. So tonight, as we continue through the file, we let the silence be honest. There is comfort, strangely, in honesty. Not comfort because the case is resolved, but because we stop pretending certainty where there is none. You can rest your hand on the page and say, "This is known, this is possible, this is uncertain." That is the patient detective's way. It keeps compassion from becoming speculation. It lets the unanswered parts remain unanswered without turning away from them. And there was one more detail that kept drawing people back across the years. Not a new solution, but a small sentence on a shop door, written for a pause so brief that nobody thought it would have to last. You can imagine that sentence being copied into notebooks, repeated in interviews, and spoken quietly at kitchen tables. Because 2 minutes is not a disappearance, not in the way people understand time. It is the length of a kettle beginning to warm, or a customer turning away and deciding to come back later. It is the length of a small errand, a moment of trust placed in an ordinary town. And yet, in the Trevaline case, those 2 minutes became the doorway into years. As you read around the note, you begin to notice how much it asks of everyone who came after. It asks whether Trevaline wrote it in a hurry, whether she expected a customer, whether she had already made an arrangement, whether someone asked her to step outside. The paper itself could not answer those things. It could only sit there, simple and practical, while detectives tried to place it inside a wider pattern. You may feel the quiet pressure of that, because a note made for a shop door was never meant to carry so much weight. There is a particular stillness in evidence that was made for everyday use. A key was made for a lock, not a timeline. A handbag was made to be carried, not to become an argument about intention. A jacket was made for weather, not for absence. When you look at those items in the Trevaline case, you are not looking at clues in the theatrical sense, but at belongings that stayed obediently in place after the person who owned them did not. Detectives had to ask what kind of person leaves these things behind willingly. They had to ask what sort of errand can be short enough to justify leaving the shop unsecured, but important enough to step away. You and I can sit with those questions without pressing them too hard. In a small town, a shopkeeper might leave for a neighbor, a delivery, a remembered task, a familiar face at the door. The difficulty is that each innocent possibility opens neatly, then closes without explaining why she never returned. If Trevaline returned to Attic Antiques after buying fruit, then the shop saw one more quiet moment before the known record thinned again. You can imagine the soft scrape of a paper bag, the scent of banana peel, the fruit placed down among older objects. The banana skin in the bin has often been treated as a sign of return, though, as with so much here, it does not speak with absolute certainty. It is one more small thing, and small things can be stubborn. If she did not return, then the fruit belongs to a different path, one that leads away from the shop before the absence becomes clear. You may find yourself tracing the streets again, from Church Street to the places where she was seen, letting the names settle slowly in the mind. Llangollen is not an enormous town, but it is not a locked room either. People can cross it in minutes. They can also be missed by eyes turned briefly elsewhere. The shopkeeper's life is important here, because routine can be one of the investigator's gentlest tools. You learn what was normal, then you notice what was not. Trevaline knew the rhythm of the shop, the customers, the passing trade, and the practical habits of a Saturday. When something breaks from routine, detectives must decide whether it is meaningful, accidental, or simply the kind of small variation that any real day contains. That decision is rarely clean. You might sit beside the file and hear the old questions asked in a measured tone. Did she expect to be back so quickly because she was meeting someone just outside? Did she leave because she had seen someone she knew? Did she receive a message or invitation that was never recorded? In 1990, a conversation could happen and vanish without a digital echo, leaving only whatever memory survived in the people nearby. That older silence sits heavily across the Trevaline case. It helps to remember the shape of the town on a Saturday. Visitors might be drifting through, drawn by the river, the hills, the bridge, the railway, the shops, and the slow charm of the streets. You can hear shoes on pavement, car doors closing, bits of conversation, the soft clink of coins at a till. In such a place, a face may be noticed and then immediately folded into the day. Later, when that same face matters, the mind may not be able to recover it cleanly. That is why the well-dressed man became both important and difficult. He was reportedly seen talking with Trevaline at Attic Antiques that morning, and that puts him close to the shop at the right time to matter. Yet closeness is not guilt. It is only closeness. You and I keep that distinction before us because patient detective work depends on restraint as much as curiosity. The description of a smartly dressed man, sometimes remembered with a blazer, has a texture of its own. It belongs to an era when clothing might still make a stranger stand out in a small shop, especially if he looked formal beside the weekend ease around him. You can imagine a witness recalling the shape of a jacket, the neatness of a shirt, perhaps a voice or posture that did not seem remarkable until later. But details remembered after fear has entered the room can harden or blur in ways nobody intends. When the artist's impression was made, it tried to give public form to that remembered presence. A face drawn from memory is an act of translation. You move from a passing glance to words, from words to pencil, from pencil to printed appeal. At each stage, something may sharpen and something may slip. In the Trevaline case, later doubts about the accuracy of that image show how carefully we have to treat even the details that once seemed central. You can picture the appeal posters and newspaper images lying on counters around Llangollen, asking ordinary people to take part in the search. This kind of public memory work is humble and imperfect. Someone stands in a queue, sees the face, and thinks of a man in a shop, a man near a car, a man at a guest house, or perhaps no one at all. Every possibility has to be tested, because in an old-fashioned inquiry, the public is not separate from the investigation. The public is part of its senses. Still, an appeal can produce too much as well as too little. People want to help. They may report sightings that are sincere but mistaken, or names that fit only loosely. Detectives must keep receiving, checking, and quietly setting aside. You can imagine the paper pile growing, statements clipped together, margins annotated, some lines underlined, others crossed through after a follow-up call. The work is careful, repetitive, and almost always slower than hope. The Trevaline case moved through that slow machinery. Names were gathered, vehicles were checked, the shop and streets were reconstructed as well as they could be. Every hour of the day had to be asked for an account of itself. You may feel, as you read, how an investigation tries to make time visible, turning a Saturday into a sequence of statements, times, routes, and remembered impressions. But time does not always cooperate. There are places in every file where the investigator's pencil pauses. The handwriting may stay steady, but the silence beneath it is not steady at all. In this case, One pause comes after the last firmer sighting. You know Trevaline was alive after the note, after the shop was left, after the morning customers. Then the sightings become softer, and the trail begins to behave like mist over the river. You can follow the dampness, but not hold it. The mention of the A5 toward Corwen carries a different atmosphere from the shop. It suggests the sound of passing traffic, the smell of summer dust and petrol, the open line of road drawing the eye away from town. If the sighting was Trevaline, then she was moving into a space less protected by routine. If it was not her, then investigators had to turn back again to Llangollen and admit that the map had not widened after all. Either way, the uncertainty cost time. You can sit with the map for a while, not as a puzzle board, but as a landscape. Church Street, Castle Street, Market Street, the river, the canal, the road outward, the hills beyond the town. Each name has its own texture, and each possible route asks different questions. A short walk can be innocent. A longer walk without belongings begins to feel strange. But strange is not the same as explained. In older missing person cases, the surrounding landscape often becomes part of the difficulty. North Wales holds beauty in layers, with wooded slopes, quiet lanes, old industrial remnants, and water moving through stone. A search team can work for hours and still cover only a portion of what may matter. You can feel the grit under boots, the chill inside shaded places, the smell of wet leaves even in summer. That physical reality is part of why patience alone does not guarantee discovery. The searches of river, canal, caves, and mine shafts show how broad the inquiry became. These were not casual gestures. They were hard, practical efforts in places where a trace might have been missed. Searchers had to look where light did not easily reach, where water changed the ground, where old workings complicated safety and access. You and I can keep the description gentle, but the labor deserves to be recognized. Every search that finds nothing changes the file in a complicated way. It may remove one possibility, or it may simply fail to prove it. That distinction matters in the Trevaline case. A river search without a result does not mean the river held nothing forever. A mine search without a result does not make every concealed place impossible. Cold cases often contain this uncomfortable kind of negative knowledge, where investigators learn where certainty was not found. For families, that kind of result can be especially hard. Nothing found may sound like relief for a moment, then become another form of waiting. You can imagine someone receiving an update after a search, hearing that there is still no answer, and feeling the house settle back into its old uncertainty. The kettle boils, the post arrives, the phone does not ring with the news that would change everything. Ordinary life goes on, but one question remains untouched. Trevaline's family had to live beside that question while the investigation continued to move through stages. Her husband, Richard, her relatives, and those who knew her all became part of the long wake of the case. We should keep them in the room with respect, because public mystery can sometimes make private grief feel very exposed. A calm retelling does not pry into pain. It simply remembers that every lead, every appeal, and every anniversary touched real people. The original investigation took place in a time when forensic science was available, but not the science familiar from later cold case breakthroughs. DNA testing existed, but its routine use and sensitivity were not what they would become. Digital record keeping was limited. Cameras were fewer. Communications were different. You can hear the clatter of office phones and typewriters fading into computer keyboards only gradually across the years. That technological distance matters. If the Trevaline case had begun decades later, the shop might have been near cameras, card transactions, phone location data, traffic systems, or digital messages. But in 1990, investigators had to work mostly through witness accounts, physical evidence, searches, and traditional inquiry. Those methods can solve cases. They have solved many, yet when the central event is unseen, their limits become very clear. You may feel the temptation to ask why there was not more evidence. That is a natural question, but old cases often answer it quietly. There may not have been more to collect, or more may have existed briefly, then disappeared through weather, cleaning, ordinary movement, or the simple fact that nobody knew yet where to look. A shop can be examined after alarm rises, but an errand path spreads through open air. By the time absence becomes known, time has already begun its work. Time is one of the great unseen actors in the Trevaline Evans case. It softens footprints, alters memory, changes relationships, and shifts the meaning of ordinary details. A person who saw her on Saturday might not give a statement until later, after hearing the news. A person who saw the man in the blazer might remember him more vividly, because others were asking. Or they might remember less, because the face had never mattered enough to keep. Detectives learn to be patient with memory without surrendering to it. They ask again, compare again, place one account beside another, and look for overlap. You can imagine statements spread across a desk, each one a window with a slightly different view. Through one, Trevaline is in the shop. Through another, she is crossing a street. Through another, perhaps she is walking away from town, but the windows do not line up into a single clear corridor. The shop's door note became one of those windows. Its wording suggested confidence in return, but not the reason for leaving. The handwriting would have been familiar, the tone practical, the message brief. You can picture it as a small rectangle of paper holding more longing than information. People have returned to it for years because it is the closest the file comes to Trevaline speaking during the disappearance. Even then, she only says she will be back soon. There is something deeply human about that. We leave little promises all the time, on doors, in messages, across kitchen tables, without imagining they might become final. Back soon. Back in 2 minutes. See you later. The words are small bridges across ordinary absence. In the Trevaline case, the bridge did not reach the other side, and that is why the phrase keeps echoing softly through the file. As you continue, you may notice how the case resists a single emotional shape. It is not only strange, it is also domestic. It is not only public, it is also intimate. It begins in a shop open to customers, but it is full of private belongings and personal routine. That mixture makes it linger. The mystery is visible in the town, yet rooted in the quiet expectations of one person's day. The question of planning has often hovered nearby. Did Trevaline plan to leave? The available facts make that difficult to accept plainly, because so many practical things stayed behind. Her car was not used. Her keys were in the shop. Her handbag and jacket remained. Her bank account showed no clear pattern of a new life. The available facts make that difficult to accept plainly, because so many practical things stayed behind. Her car was not used. Her keys were in the shop. Her handbag and jacket remained. Her bank account showed no clear pattern of a new life. You can place these facts carefully together, and they form a strong suggestion that she expected to return. But suggestion is not the same as a found person. The question of accident also arises, as it often does when someone vanishes near water, roads, and uneven landscape. But accidents usually leave traces, especially after searches, though not always. In Llangollen and its surroundings, terrain could hide more than a town street would. You hold this possibility quietly, without forcing it into certainty. The investigation looked, and kept looking, but the land and water did not give back the answer. The question of another person's involvement is harder, because it opens outward into motive, opportunity, and evidence. A possible stranger in the shop matters. A sudden departure matters. Belongings left behind matter. Yet without a clear witness, forensic link, confession, or discovery, involvement remains a possibility rather than a proven fact. You and I keep returning to that line, because the file itself seems to stand there, waiting. A cold case can become crowded with certainty from people who do not carry the burden of proof. They may say, it must have been this person, or that route, or that hidden motive. But detectives cannot live on must have been. They need what can be shown. They need something that holds in the light. The Trevaline case has many reasons for suspicion and concern, but the final showing has never arrived. That is part of why the years can feel so heavy. Each anniversary renews attention, and attention brings theories, and theories bring fresh emotion. Then, when no proof follows, the case returns to its quiet shelf. You can imagine the file being put away again, not forgotten, but waiting. The cabinet closes with a soft metal sound. The room smells faintly of dust, old glue, and paper that has absorbed many seasons. When police reopened the case, they were not simply rereading. They were trying to see whether newer techniques, fresh interviews, or different perspectives could change the old shape. Cold case review is a patient craft. You check whether assumptions hardened too early. You ask whether overlooked material can be tested. You compare names against later knowledge. You rebuild timelines with the humility of knowing that every earlier investigator was working under pressure. The arrest of Richard Evans in 2001 sits in that review history, and we mention it carefully because carefulness is required. He was released without charge. That means the inquiry moved through suspicion and did not arrive at prosecution. For a listener half asleep, the distinction should be clear and gentle. A person's name in an investigation is not the same as an answer, and this file did not close there. Richard had been away from Llangollen earlier that day, according to reports of his work at the holiday bungalow near Rutland, and the family's wider circumstances were examined. As you read, you may sense how missing person investigations often turn first toward the closest relationships, not because closeness proves anything, but because investigators have to understand a person's life from the center outward. It is a difficult, necessary process. It can leave painful marks, even when no charge follows. The wider public may remember the arrest more vividly than the release, because arrest is a louder word. But in this calm room, we keep both parts together. Questioned and released. Investigated and not charged. The case still unresolved. This discipline matters because old cases can be unfair to the living, as well as unanswered for the missing. And patient work asks us not to turn gaps into verdicts. You can imagine how the file felt after that review failed to resolve it. The boxes had been opened. The older statements had been read again. The hope of new forensic movement had been considered. Yet Trevaline remained missing, and the shop still held its original silence. That kind of disappointment does not usually arrive as a dramatic fall. It arrives as another day when the phone does not ring. The public appeals continued in later years because investigators still believed someone might know something. The wording often shifted, but the heart of the appeal remained the same. Think back. Remember the day. Remember the shop. Remember a woman, a man, a car, a conversation, a detail that seemed too small to offer. You can hear the patience in that request. It asks memory to open after years, knowing it may not. In some long investigations, a single late witness changes everything. Someone speaks after a relationship ends. Someone finds an object in a loft. Someone rereads an old diary. Someone realizes a date they had confused. The hope for such a turn is not foolish. It has solved other cases. But hope has to share the room with realism, and realism says that many old files wait without receiving that final gift. The Trevaline case sits among those files. It is known enough to be remembered, but unresolved enough to resist confident explanation. It has the shape of an old mystery, yet the human warmth of a local disappearance. You can feel why it draws people back. It begins with a small shop, not a vast conspiracy. It asks how an ordinary woman could step out briefly and never return. That question is simple to ask, and terribly hard to answer. If you are the detective tonight, you might take out a clean sheet and write only the certainties. Trevaline opened the shop. She was seen by people who knew her. A note said she would return quickly. She bought fruit nearby. Her belongings remained. She was seen later near home. Searchers found no answer. The lines are plain, almost bare, and yet they contain the whole weight of the case. Then you might write the uncertainties beneath. The identity and significance of the well-dressed man. Whether Trevaline returned to the shop after the fruit purchase. Whether the later sightings were truly her. Why she was away from the shop longer than promised. Whether she met someone, chose a route, accepted a lift, suffered an accident, or encountered something no witness saw. Each uncertainty is a room without a lamp, and the file has stood at the threshold of each one. The sensory world of the case remains strangely vivid because the facts are so ordinary. The weight of keys on a counter, the smooth skin of an apple, the fibrous peel of a banana, the faint scent of flowers left behind, the dry touch of a handwritten note. You can almost feel these things as you read, and they make the absence more real because they belong to a person expecting to resume her day. In a more dramatic story, such objects might be arranged as symbols. Here, they are simply what remained. That simplicity is powerful. It tells you the disappearance did not announce itself before it happened. Nobody in the morning seems to have understood that the day would become a date repeated for decades. The shop did not look like history while Trevaline stood inside it. It looked like work. There is a gentleness in understanding that. Most of life looks ordinary while it is happening. The future does not usually mark the things it will ask us to remember. A customer might have glanced at a shelf and forgotten the conversation. A passerby might have seen Trevaline cross the street and thought nothing of it. Only later does the mind turn back, searching the afternoon for a sign it did not know to keep. This is one reason cold cases carry so much sorrow. They are often built from days that were not recognized in time. People did not write down every face because they had no reason. They did not preserve every receipt because it was just a Saturday. They did not notice every car because the road was doing what roads do. By the time the day becomes important, the day itself has already dispersed. The Trevaline investigation had to gather what remained after that dispersal. Statements, timelines, belongings, sightings, searches, appeals. Each was a way of calling the day back. You can imagine detectives trying to reconstruct the hours with the care of someone rebuilding a broken piece of china, matching edges by touch, finding that some fragments are missing entirely. The shape can be sensed, but not completed. We can linger for a moment on attic antiques as a place of old objects, because the setting feels quietly fitting. Antique shops are rooms where other people's pasts sit openly on shelves. They hold things no longer used in their first homes, but not yet forgotten. A clock without its original mantle, a cup separated from its set, a photograph frame waiting for a new picture. In Trevaline's shop, the past was already present before the case made its own history there. That atmosphere may be one reason people remember the case so clearly. The idea of a woman vanishing from an antique shop has a haunting simplicity. Though we should keep the word gentle, it feels like a story made of old wood, dust, glass, and unanswered footsteps. But underneath that atmosphere is not folklore. It is a real missing person inquiry, with real statements and a family who needed facts more than mood. So we let the atmosphere help us listen, but we do not let it carry us away. You and I stay near the known record. We imagine only what helps us understand the scale and texture of the investigation. We do not invent conversations. We do not fill the unseen moment with drama. We simply notice that the setting made the silence more memorable, because old objects remained while the living owner disappeared. Across the years, some reports describe renewed searches and new interest when possible links or claims emerged. The case was never entirely still in public memory. It surfaced, receded, and surfaced again, like something seen beneath moving water. You can hear how each resurfacing might have affected those who loved Trevaline. Attention can bring hope, and hope can bring exhaustion when it does not become an answer. The media's role in cold cases is complicated. Publicity can reach the one person who knows something. It can also simplify, repeat errors, or lean too heavily on a detail that investigators view more cautiously. In the Trevaline case, the familiar elements became almost ritual. The note, the shop, the fruit, the belongings, the smartly dressed man, the possible road sightings. Repetition kept the case alive, but it could not solve what evidence did not support. You can imagine a detective reading a newspaper account and checking it against the file. A sentence may be slightly wrong, a time may be rounded, a description may be compressed. None of this necessarily comes from bad intent. It is what happens when complex uncertainty is turned into public story. The patient investigator has to keep returning to the original documents, where the wording may be less tidy, but more honest. That honesty includes saying, sometimes, we do not know. We do not know why Trevaline left the shop. We do not know whether the man in the blazer was connected. We do not know where she went after the last reliable sighting. We do not know why no trace has been found. These sentences are not failures of imagination. They are the guardrails that keep the telling respectful. In sleep narration, the words "we do not know" can become soft rather than sharp. They allow the listener to stop reaching for an answer. They allow the file to remain open without demanding that the mind solve it tonight. You can breathe with them. We do not know. The page remains. The lamp is still warm. The questions are written down, and for now, writing them honestly is enough. But investigators could not rest there, of course. They had to move through practical steps, even when each step might end in another blank. They checked bank accounts and personal circumstances. They examined the car. They spoke with people who knew Trevaline and people who may only have passed her in the town. They widened the radius when necessary, because absence does not respect the neat edges of a map. The fact that her bank account was not used afterward has always been significant. Money leaves tracks, especially when someone is trying to begin again. Even in 1990, a continued life would usually require practical movement, payments, withdrawals, arrangements. The absence of such signs does not prove one single scenario, but it makes voluntary disappearance harder to sustain. You can see why investigators and family would keep returning to that point. The car, too, matters in its quiet way. A dark blue Ford Escort Estate is a practical object, a means of movement, a part of daily life. It remained unused. If Trevaline had intended to travel far, leaving the car and keys behind made little sense. You place that beside the handbag and jacket, and the picture becomes one of interruption rather than preparation. Yet the file still cannot tell us what interrupted her. A shopkeeper might step out without a coat on a mild day. She might leave a car if walking nearby was easier. She might leave a handbag if she expected only moments away. Each individual choice can be ordinary. Together, in retrospect, they become painful. This is how cold case evidence often works. A detail does not become strange until it is joined to the fact that the person never came back. That retroactive strangeness is hard for witnesses too. Something seen at the time as normal may later feel charged with meaning. A man speaking in a shop, a woman walking with purpose, a car parked where it had been before. You can feel the mind trying to relight those moments from behind, asking them to reveal more than they originally showed. Sometimes they do. More often, they remain partial. The Trevaline case has also been shaped by geography beyond Llangollen. Rhuddlan appears because of the holiday bungalow work. Corran appears because of the possible road sighting. Wider places appear through later alleged sightings. The map keeps opening and closing. You follow it with your finger, then return to Church Street, because every line seems to begin there. The shop is the center, even when the inquiry moves far away. There is a comfort in returning to a center, even an unanswered one. It keeps the file from dissolving into rumor. Whenever theories grow too wide, the investigator can go back to the first page. What do we know from that morning? What was seen? What was left? What was recorded? This habit is not coldness of heart, it is a form of care. Because care without discipline can lose the person it means to honor. Trevaline was not only a mystery, she was a woman with habits, relationships, and a place in her community. She had a shop she tended, a home she returned to, family ties, and people who recognized her voice. You and I keep her personhood close, because unresolved cases can sometimes make the missing seem like an idea. She was not an idea. She was present in the world until a specific Saturday, in a specific town, among specific people. As the file ages, the case becomes a meeting point between memory and record. Some who gave statements may no longer be alive. Others may be elderly. Buildings may have changed. Streets may feel different under modern traffic. But the record preserves the older day in fragments. You can almost hear the thin paper move as you lift one sheet, and that sound becomes a small act of return. There is patience in rereading. The first time through a file, you search for the answer. The second time, you search for contradictions. Later, perhaps, you search for tone, for omissions, for the way a witness chose one word instead of another. Cold case detectives often live in those later readings. They know the main facts already. They are listening for the faint shift beneath them. What might such a shift look like in the Trevaline case? A timing that does not sit comfortably. A name that appears in two places but was never compared. A vehicle description that resembles another report. A witness who placed themselves somewhere a few minutes differently in a later statement. We are not saying any one of these exists. We are only sitting beside the method, because patient detective work is partly the willingness to ask old pages new questions. Sometimes new questions come from new technology. Sometimes they come from a younger investigator who was not shaped by the original assumptions. Sometimes they come from family members who never stopped reading. In many old cases, solved after decades, the breakthrough looks sudden from outside, but inside it rests on years of storage, persistence, and small decisions not to throw things away. The quiet shelf matters. The labeled envelope matters. The unresolved file matters. For Trevaline, no such breakthrough has arrived, at least not publicly, but the file's survival still has meaning. It means the facts can be reviewed. It means appeals can be made with grounding. It means her name is not dependent only on rumor. You can feel the value of that as you imagine the archive room, its steady temperature, its boxes arranged with little ceremony, each one holding a human story that did not finish properly. There is also a kind of humility in the case. It reminds us that not every question yields to effort, even sincere effort. Searchers can walk, detectives can interview, families can appeal, journalists can revisit, listeners can sit with the story, yet the missing fact remains missing. That humility is not hopelessness. It is the quiet recognition that truth sometimes waits beyond the reach of the tools used to find it. The well-dressed man remains one of those unreachable places. If he was simply a customer, he may never have known how important his visit seemed later, or he may have come forward and been eliminated in a way not fully visible to public memory. If he did not come forward, the reasons may range from innocent to significant. The file does not let us choose. You hold him, as detectives did, as a question shaped like a person. The possible later sightings work similarly. A woman walking along a road. A woman near a park. A woman perhaps seen farther away in later months or years. Each account offers a doorway, but not every doorway leads to a room. You can imagine investigators stepping through, checking, asking, comparing, and often finding only another corridor back to uncertainty. This is exhausting work, and yet it must be done gently, because every report may have come from someone trying to help. The physical searches are easier to visualize, though not easier to endure. A line of people moving through damp ground, dogs working along banks, officers looking into old shafts with lamps, water searched in slow sections. The smell of mud, wet stone and crushed grass rises from these pages, even if the file itself is dry. You can sense how the landscape resisted quick answers, giving back weather and silence instead. When nothing is found, the mind sometimes tries to make that absence meaningful. Perhaps it means she left the area. Perhaps it means the search missed the place. Perhaps it means a person concealed something carefully. Perhaps it means the true route was different. All of these are possible in the abstract, and none is enough alone. The patient detective writes them down, then asks what supports them, and often finds the support too thin. Thin support is not the same as no support, and that is what makes old cases difficult. A witness may support one possibility lightly. An object may support another. The geography may make a third plausible. But proof usually requires more than plausibility. It requires connection. In the Trevaline case, many pieces can be laid near one another, yet the connecting thread remains missing. You may think of it like a necklace broken on a table, each bead real, each one touched and counted. The note is one bead, the fruit is another. The keys, the handbag, the car, the sightings, the man, the searches, the appeals, all lie there in reach. But the string is gone. Without it, we can see the material of the case, but not wear it as a completed account. That image is quiet enough for this hour, and it suits the atmosphere of an antique shop, where small objects often outlive their original meanings. The file itself has become an object of that kind. It was made for investigation, then became history, then became the subject of renewed appeals and careful retellings. You can almost feel its cardboard cover under your fingertips, worn pale at the edges by many hands. Those hands matter. The first officers who took the missing report, the searchers who walked water and woodland, the detectives who checked lists of names, the people who answered doors during house-to-house inquiries, the cold case officers who reopened boxes years later, the family members who kept asking. A cold case is never only the missing hour, it is also the long labor that follows it. And long labor can be very quiet. It can mean a phone call made after another shift should have ended. It can mean a retired officer remembering a detail over breakfast and making one more inquiry. It can mean a family member clipping a newspaper article and placing it in a drawer. Hajen places a drawer. It can mean someone in Llangollen pausing outside a shopfront because the old story has passed through their mind again. These are not dramatic acts, but they keep the file alive. In the Trevaline case, the public imagination often returns to the shop door because it is the last deliberate message. Back in 2 minutes. The phrase has the simplicity of a bookmark placed in a book one expects to resume. You can picture the page left open, the reader stepping away, the room waiting. But the reader does not come back, and years later, others are still standing near the table, wondering where the story turned. That metaphor is only a way of breathing with the facts, not replacing them. The real details remain modest and stubborn. Trevaline left Attic Antiques. She did not return. Her belongings stayed there. The investigation widened and found no answer. Every retelling must pass through those statements, because they are the load-bearing beams of the case. Without them, the story becomes mist. With them, it remains a file. The longer you sit with it, the more you may notice how absence organizes everything around itself. The shop becomes defined by who is not behind the counter. The car becomes defined by who did not drive it. The keys become defined by the hand that did not take them. The note becomes defined by the return that did not happen. Absence is not visible, but in this case it shapes every visible thing. That shaping continued through the town. People who knew Trevaline may have measured later Saturdays against that one, consciously or not. A bright morning, a shop door, a handwritten note, a customer asking about an object. Ordinary details can carry echoes when a community has lived through a disappearance. You can feel how a place remembers, not always aloud, but in the small hesitations of people who were there. Cold cases are often community memories as much as police records. They live in family conversations, local history, newspaper archives, and the quiet knowledge of streets. Llangollen's beauty did not disappear because of the case, but the case became one of the shadows within its story. A bridge can still be lovely. A river can still sound peaceful. Yet for those who remember Trevaline, certain places may always hold an extra layer. We should not make that layer darker than it is. It is simply memory. A town can hold sorrow and ordinary life at once. People still buy bread, meet friends, open shops, walk dogs, and stand by the river. The presence of an old unresolved case does not stop life. It becomes part of the background texture, like a photograph kept in a drawer rather than on the mantle, known even when unseen. For investigators, the background never fully disappears. They may have other cases, other duties, other urgent calls, but an unsolved file waits with a particular patience. It does not complain. It does not age in the same way people do. It keeps its times and names exactly as they were written. When a new appeal is planned, the file comes forward again, and the old Saturday returns with it. The Trevaline case returned many times in that way. Anniversaries brought statements from police, pleas for information, and reminders that even small details could matter. The phrase "small details" is important because people often withhold information when it feels incomplete. They think, perhaps, that they did not see enough. They think someone else must have said it already. They think it cannot matter after so long, but cold files sometimes turn on what once seemed too little. You can imagine a person carrying such a detail for years without malice. Maybe a remark heard in a pub, maybe a car parked oddly, maybe a face in town that did not belong, maybe a memory of a customer who asked questions about closing time. We do not invent any of these as facts. We only understand why police keep asking. They know that significance is not always visible to the person who holds it. There is a gentle ethics in asking the public to remember. The request has to be clear, but not accusatory. It has to invite without frightening. It has to leave room for uncertainty. In old cases, people may be ashamed that they waited, or afraid of being wrong, or worried about stirring pain. A careful appeal says, in effect, bring what you have, and we will see whether it belongs. That is patient detective work as community trust. The emotional patience of families is different. They are not sorting evidence as an exercise. They are waiting for the person they love to be accounted for. Years do not make that need vanish. They only change its daily shape. At first, waiting may be active and raw, full of calls and searches. Later, it may become quieter, woven into anniversaries and names spoken with care. But quiet does not mean gone. When you read about Trevaline's family keeping the case visible, you can sense that kind of endurance. It is not the endurance of certainty. It is the endurance of love without an answer. There is no need to heighten it. The plain fact is enough. A woman disappeared from her shop, and the people who loved her never received the simple human comfort of knowing exactly what happened. The police, too, have spoken across the years about keeping an open mind. That phrase can sound official, but it has real meaning here. An open mind is not a mind without standards. It is a mind that refuses to close around a theory before proof arrives. In the Trevaline case, where the key moment is unseen, keeping an open mind may be the most honest position available. It leaves space for truth to be stranger, simpler, or sadder than any theory. You, as the quiet detective tonight, can practice that same discipline. You let the man in the shop remain a question. You let the sightings remain graded by reliability. You let the belongings suggest interruption, not dictate an entire account. You let the searches show effort, not certainty. This is a slower way of thinking, and perhaps it suits the hour, because sleep itself asks us to loosen our grip. Still, loosening the grip is not the same as forgetting. We keep the facts near. We keep Trevaline's name near. We keep Llangollen, Attic Antiques, Church Street, the 16th of June 1990, and the note on the door. We keep the confirmed sighting near Market Street. We keep the unknowns in their places, neither inflated nor dismissed. The file remains quiet, but not empty. There is an old-fashioned sound to the word shop that matters here. Not a store in the broad modern sense, but a small room of trade, personality, and routine. A shopkeeper often knows who comes in often, who only looks, who talks too long, who buys carefully, who stands near the door. That familiarity can be useful in an investigation, because deviations stand out. Yet if the decisive person was a stranger passing through, familiarity may not have reached him. Tourist towns complicate recognition. A stranger is expected there. Visitors arrive, look around, ask directions, buy something small, and leave. Their presence does not immediately trouble anyone. On a Saturday in Llangollen, a person could be present for an hour and then gone into the wider road system, leaving behind no reason for a local witness to remember a name. You can feel the old investigative challenge in that ordinary freedom. Today, we might expect traces from a bank card, a mobile phone, a camera, a parking payment, or a digital booking. In 1990, a visitor could move through a town with far less record. Cash could buy lunch, a paper map could guide the road, a conversation could leave no metadata at all. It is almost hard to remember that world now, and yet the Trevaline case belongs firmly inside it. That world does not make the mystery romantic, it makes it harder. It means detectives had fewer ways to identify the people near the shop. It means a passing car might never be placed. It means an ordinary errand could vanish into witness memory rather than recorded footage. As you turn this part of the file, you may hear the absence of cameras almost like a sound, a quiet blankness where modern cases often have grainy video. But even modern tools do not solve everything, and that is worth remembering too. The heart of an investigation is still careful thinking, humane interviewing, and respect for evidence. Technology can widen the field, but it cannot replace the need to ask what is known and what is only assumed. In the Trevaline case, the older methods did much of what they could, and the unanswered space remained. There are cold cases solved by a single preserved item, and others solved by a witness who finally speaks. There are also cases where every preserved item has been examined, every known witness recontacted, and still the file gives no final answer. Trevaline's disappearance has lived painfully close to that second kind. It has not lacked attention. It has lacked the decisive piece that changes attention into resolution. When we talk about why it went cold, we should also talk about the difference between a lead and a path. A lead points somewhere. A path can be walked until it reaches something. The Trevaline file had many leads. The man, the sightings, the searches, the later reviews. But too many of them became short paths ending in fog, and after enough such endings the investigation's forward movement slowed. Fog is a gentle image, but it can be exact. It does not mean nothing is there. It means the eye cannot separate shapes at a distance. Detectives in cold cases often work in that condition, seeing outlines but not enough definition. They may sense that a detail matters, yet be unable to prove how. They may suspect a route, yet find no trace along it. They may believe someone knows more, yet not know who. The Trevaline case invites that feeling again and again, a note that suggests quick return, a possible stranger, a confirmed movement near home. a possible movement toward the edge of town, a landscape searched without result. The elements feel close to meaning, but they do not quite meet. You can sit with that nearness and understand why people have kept thinking about it for so long. Sometimes, the mind wants a case to have a clean reason for going cold. A missed witness, a lost item, a mistake in the first hours. Such things can happen, and they can matter deeply. But not every cold case has one visible hinge. Some go cold because reality did not leave enough behind. The Trevaline case may belong to that quieter, more frustrating category, where the lack of a clear final trace shaped everything that followed. This does not mean there were no errors, because no human inquiry is perfect. It means that, from the public record we can sit with, the core difficulty appears to be the thinness of the decisive moment. The shop could be described, the town could be canvassed, the surrounding places could be searched, but the moment after the known routine broke remained mostly unseen. That unseen moment became the cold center. You may imagine the detectives returning to it late at night, even years later, a cup left half-finished, a lamp pooling light on a folder, the same sequence read again in a room that smells of paper and cooling radiator metal. The question is not shouted, it is simply present. Why did she leave? Where did she go? Who saw her last with certainty? A patient investigator can live a long time beside those questions. Living beside questions is not the same as accepting defeat. It is a way of keeping readiness. If a new lead appears, the old knowledge must be there to meet it. If someone speaks, the file must know how to test the statement. If a location is named, search history must be reviewed. Cold case work is waiting with preparation, not waiting with empty hands. The Trevaline file, for all its silence, remains prepared in that way. As the years stretch, public memory changes its texture. Younger people learn the case as local history. Older people remember where they were when the first appeals appeared. Some may recall the shop personally. Others know only the phrase, "back in 2 minutes." The story becomes both specific and symbolic, a reminder of how quickly ordinary life can become unanswered. You can feel why that phrase is still repeated, because it carries the whole ache in plain words. Plain words are often the strongest in old cases. Missing, seen, left, returned, unknown, open. They do not decorate. They do not perform. They simply stand where the file needs them. In this script, we let the language remain calm for the same reason. The case is not helped by sharpness. It asks for a steady voice, like someone reading by lamplight while the rest of the house grows quiet. And perhaps that is where we are now, in the slow middle of the telling. The first rush of the investigation has passed. The reopened boxes have not yielded the answer. The anniversaries have kept Trevaline's name alive. We are sitting with the file at the point where repetition becomes not redundancy, but care. You read the same facts again because they are all that can be honestly held. There is one more way to look at the note, and it is softer than a theory. It tells us that Trevaline belonged to the world of small courtesies. She did not simply leave the door unattended, without explanation. She told anyone who came by that she would be back soon. That tiny act of consideration has survived longer than anyone could have imagined. You can feel the tenderness of that, even though it cannot solve the case. The same is true of the fruit. An apple and a banana are ordinary purchases, but in the file they become signs of a day still moving normally. They suggest appetite, routine, perhaps a small break in the rhythm of work. You can smell the sweetness of fruit in a paper bag, feel the slight wax of apple skin, the softness of banana under thumb. These sensory details do not reveal the answer, but they remind us that the missing person was living inside a normal hour. Normal hours are fragile in retrospect. We only know they were normal until they were not. Trevaline may have expected the rest of Saturday to unfold plainly, with the shop closing, the journey home, the familiar evening. The people who saw her may have expected to see her again. The town expected nothing unusual. Then, quietly, expectation failed. That failure is what the investigation has been measuring ever since. The confirmed sighting near Market Street complicates any too simple version of the day. It means the story did not end immediately at the shop door. It means she was observed later in a familiar part of town. You follow her there in your mind, not as a chase, but as a slow walk through known streets. Market Street brings home into the frame, and home brings another layer of unanswered intention. Was she going there, leaving there, or simply passing nearby? The file does not say enough to answer, so you place a small marker at Market Street and keep moving. That is how the patient reading proceeds, marker by marker. Known, possible, unknown. It may not feel satisfying, but it is honest. Satisfaction belongs to solved stories. This one asks for endurance instead. The possible sighting toward Corwin, if it was Trevaline, would suggest movement away from the center. That possibility carries the hush of roadside space, the rhythm of vehicles passing, the sky wider than it is between shop fronts. You can imagine a witness seeing someone only briefly, then later trying to recall height, clothing, pace, and expression. How certain can a person be after a glance? Sometimes very certain, sometimes not enough. Investigators had to live with those gradations. A strong sighting can anchor a timeline. A weaker one can guide inquiry without proving direction. Too much reliance on a weak sighting can pull a case away from its true path. Too little reliance can miss the one chance that mattered. This balance is delicate, and it rarely looks dramatic from outside. It is the quiet art of waiting uncertainty. The Park Avenue report and the river direction bring another set of textures. The sound of water, the cool air near banks, the mix of paths, houses, and open ground. If the sighting was correct, it might place Trevaline near a different route through the town's edge. If not, it adds another sympathetic mistake to the file. Either way, the investigators had to consider it, because every old case is made from such careful considerations. You can feel the work of elimination in your hands. Cross out this car after checking its owner. Set aside this name after confirming an alibi. Mark this sighting uncertain. Keep this one active. Return to the shop. Return to the household canvas. Return to the road. The rhythm is not thrilling, but it is deeply human, because it is the rhythm of people trying not to miss what may matter. More than 1,500 people were reportedly checked in connection with the case, and that number, spoken gently, gives us a sense of scale. Each name represents a person, a question, a possible connection, or an eliminated lead. Hundreds of vehicles were also considered and ruled out. You can imagine the administrative weight of that. The ledgers, forms, interview notes, and card indexes, all part of the quiet machinery behind a public appeal. Such numbers can sound large without conveying the lived labor. So we slow them down. One door knocked, one statement taken, one registration noted, one alibi checked, one call returned, one search route completed. Repeated again and again, these small acts become the investigation. If an answer does not come, the work still happened, and the people who did it still gave the file their hours. In the Trevaline case, those hours accumulated across decades. The original investigation, the later review, the renewed appeals, the media revisits, the family memories, the local conversations. All of it forms a kind of long vigil, not dramatic, not loud, just persistent. You can imagine the case as a lamp left burning in a back office, not bright enough to fill the town, but not extinguished either. A lamp is a fitting image because the file needs steady light more than heat. Heat can distort. It can make speculation shimmer like fact. Steady light lets you see the edges of what is actually there, the note, the belongings, the sightings, the searches. The lack of later financial activity, the absence of a confirmed resolution. Under steady light, the case remains difficult, but it does not become false. The quiet study of the Trevaline case also asks us to consider how people disappear socially before they disappear physically from public attention. At first, everybody asks. Then fewer people ask. Then the case belongs to anniversaries, archives, and those closest to it. This gradual shrinking is natural, but it can feel cruel. Public attention has tides. Family attention does not. The file sits somewhere between them. That is why retellings should be careful. They bring public attention back, even if only for an hour, and they should do so without making a spectacle of uncertainty. We speak softly because the absence is real. We include detail because detail is respect. We avoid gore and sharpness because this case does not require them. Its quiet is enough, the unanswered shop door is enough. If your eyes are heavy as we move through this middle section, you do not need to hold every time and street perfectly. The file will remain where it is. What matters is the pattern. A woman leaves a shop expecting to return. The ordinary signs point back toward routine. The day offers glimpses, but not a full account. Investigators search widely, ask patiently, and keep returning to the same small cluster of facts. That is the shape of it. Within that shape, every detail has been asked to do more than it can. The note is asked to reveal intention. The fruit is asked to show movement. The car is asked to prove she did not leave voluntarily. The sightings are asked to extend the path. The man in the shop is asked to provide a possible explanation. But evidence has limits, and when each piece reaches its limit, the silence between pieces remains. The silence is not empty though. It contains the work already done, the care still present, and the possibility, however faint, of future information. Some cold cases have changed after longer periods than this. Others have not. We do not need to predict. We only need to sit accurately with where the Trevaline file has been and how it came to rest in its present unresolved form. That is enough for this part of the night. You might imagine placing the shop note in a protective sleeve, though the real handling belongs to investigators and archives. The image helps us feel the tenderness of preservation. A note meant for minutes becomes an object kept for decades. Paper that could have been thrown away becomes part of a national memory of a missing woman. It is a strange fate for an ordinary message, and yet cold cases are full of such transformations. Objects become evidence when a life around them changes. The shop becomes a scene. The street becomes a timeline. The fruit becomes a marker. The car becomes a question. This transformation can feel almost unfair to the objects because they remain simple while we burden them with meaning. But they are what we have, so we handle them gently and we do not ask them to say more than they can. As the file moves forward in time, the town behind it also moves. Attic Antiques is no longer simply that working shop in 1990. It is remembered through the case. People who never met Trevaline may know the doorway because of the disappearance. A place can be changed by what happened there, even when its bricks remain the same. You can picture evening light touching the glass years later, while someone passing by thinks of the note. This is how unsolved cases become part of the emotional map of a place. Not official monuments, necessarily, but private markers. Here was the shop. Here was the street. Here was the last confirmed part of her day. The map becomes layered with memory, and those who know the story walk through more than one time at once. That layered walking is quiet, but it is real. In the file, the old interviews may hold small human moments that never reached the public story. A customer remembering Trevaline's manner. A neighbor describing the ordinary rhythm of her day. Someone noting weather, traffic, or the look of the town that morning. These details may not solve anything, but they matter because they keep the record from becoming only absence. They show life around the edges of the disappearance. You can sense, too, the burden on witnesses who were uncertain. To be unsure in a serious case can feel uncomfortable. People may worry about misleading police or failing to help, yet uncertainty honestly reported is useful. A detective would rather know the limits of a memory than receive confidence that does not belong there. In the Trevaline case, where sightings vary in strength, that honesty becomes part of the file's structure. There is patience in saying, "I think it was her, but I cannot be certain." There is patience in recording that statement without forcing it higher or lower than it deserves. You may feel how different this is from public storytelling, where uncertainty often gets smoothed away. In the actual work, uncertainty has texture. It is graded, dated, compared, revisited, and sometimes left exactly where it began. The same patience applies to rumors. Every long case gathers them. Some are born from genuine concern, some from misheard facts, some from the human need to fill a blank. Investigators cannot ignore every rumor, because one may contain a real thread. They cannot believe every rumor, because most will not. So they listen, check, and return to the evidence. It is slow, sometimes thankless work. In a small community, rumors can have a cost. They may attach themselves to innocent people. They may reopen grief. They may make witnesses reluctant. That is why a careful voice matters when we retell the Trevaline case. We name what is known, and we keep speculation soft-edged. We do not need to accuse in order to understand why suspicion arose. We do not need to solve in order to care. The file's unresolved nature also invites comparison with other cases, especially those solved years later by forensic advances. It is natural to wonder whether something similar could happen here. Perhaps some preserved item might one day yield more. Perhaps a fresh review might notice a connection. Perhaps a person with knowledge might finally speak. These possibilities can be held, but they should not be promised. Hope should be honest, or it becomes another burden. Honest hope sounds like this. The case remains capable of receiving information. The name remains known. The old facts remain available for review. That is not a solution, but it is not nothing. You can sit with that in the quiet, feeling the difference between a closed door and a door that has not opened yet. The Trevaline case has spent many years at that threshold. The threshold image brings us back to the physical shop door. A door is an everyday object, but in this case it divides before and after, inside the belongings, outside the errand, on the door the note, beyond the door the uncertainty. You can stand there in imagination without making the scene tense. The street is calm. The glass catches daylight. The message is small. The unanswered years are still beyond the listener's sight, waiting to unfold. When Trevaline stepped away, she could not have known how much attention would later gather at that threshold. She could not have known that people decades later would study her last known movements, or that a simple phrase would become inseparable from her name. That thought is humbling. It reminds us that the people inside case files did not live as case files. They lived minute by minute, as we all do. Minute by minute is also how investigations are reconstructed. A morning becomes a set of intervals. A note appears around a known time. A purchase occurs nearby. A sighting is placed later. Each interval is measured, then remeasured. You can feel the old clockwork of it, not dramatic, just steady. The detective's task is to see whether the gears connect. In the Trevaline case, some do, and some spin without engaging. That partial connection is exactly why the case remains so compelling in a subdued way. It is not a complete void. There are enough facts to invite close reading. But the facts stop short of resolution. A case with no information can become abstract. A case with too much clarity becomes solved. This one rests in the aching middle, where the mind can walk a familiar path and still not reach the end. As we keep walking that path, the sensory world stays with us. The cool brass of a door handle, the muted shine on polished furniture, the papery dryness of an old receipt. The sweet smell of fruit beginning to ripen, the river air beyond the town center. These are not decorations. They are ways of remembering that evidence enters the world through the senses before it becomes language on a page. A witness sees, hears, smells, touches, and only later speaks. The statement is already a translation of experience. That is why two people can remember the same morning differently without either meaning harm. One notices clothing, another notices time, another remembers manner, another remembers only that the town was busy. Investigators must weave these sensory fragments into a timeline sturdy enough to test. In the Trevaline Evans file, that woven timeline has never become sturdy enough to cross all the way. It holds the early day. It supports the first movements. Then it begins to fray. You can see where the threads loosen, and that is where the case went cold. Not at the beginning, where there was activity and witness contact, but after the shock, where certainty gave way to fragments and the fragments could not bind together. The phrase "after the shock" carries more meaning the longer we sit with it. It does not only refer to geography. It refers to the point where the investigation leaves the most concrete setting and enters the open world. After the shop, there is less control. After the shop, there is less physical evidence. After the shop, the case depends on whether human memory noticed enough. That dependence is fragile. Fragility is not failure. It is simply the condition of many investigations. People are not recording devices. Streets are not archives. Water does not preserve every answer. Time does not pause because something important has happened. The Trevaline case asks us to accept that fragility without becoming careless. We can be gentle and exact at once. In fact, this kind of story requires both. A gentle account lets the listener remain close without being alarmed. An exact account keeps the missing person from being lost inside mood. So we return again to names and places. Trevaline Evans. Attic Antiques. Church Street. Llangollen. Market Street. The River Dee. The A5 toward Corwen. Rudlan. Each name is a small anchor. If you drift, the names bring you back. There is an almost archival comfort in repeated names. They create order without pretending to answer. You may hear them the way a detective hears labels on file folders. Each one a point of return. The mind can rest on them. It does not have to roam wildly through possibility. It can come back to the folder, the map, the note, and the slow work of reading. And as you read, you may notice how much of the case depends on the word return. Trevaline intended to return to the shop. The investigators returned to the scene. The family returned to public appeals. The media returned on anniversaries. We return now, softly, because the case itself has never found its return. That repetition is not dramatic. It is simply the shape of waiting. Waiting changes people. It teaches them to live around an absence. It can make hope smaller, but more durable. It can make a name feel both close and far away. In cold case work, waiting also changes evidence. What was once fresh becomes historical. What was once a lead becomes a record of a lead. What was once a living witness becomes a memory preserved in writing. The whole file slowly becomes older than the people first expected it to become. Yet old does not mean useless. Old files have solved cases when kept carefully. Old statements can contradict later claims. Old photographs can show objects overlooked at the time. Old envelopes can hold material that newer science reads differently. You can feel why preservation matters, even when years pass without movement. The future may need the care taken in the past. In Trevaline's case, we do not know whether future care will bring an answer. That remains outside our reach tonight. But we can see that the record has endured enough to keep her story specific. She is not only a missing woman from Wales, she is Trevaline Evans, who opened Attic Antiques in Llangollen on a Saturday morning. left a note saying she would be back in 2 minutes, and did not return. Specificity is a form of respect. Respect also means noticing what the case does not allow. It does not allow us to describe a final event. It does not allow us to identify a responsible person. It does not allow us to explain every sighting or every silence. It asks us to stay with incompleteness. That may feel unsatisfying to a waking mind, but for a nighttime listener, perhaps incompleteness can be held more gently, like an unfinished line of music fading into the room. The old investigation rooms themselves may be gone or changed, but you can still imagine them. Desks with stacked files, pinboards with maps and photographs, a kettle somewhere down the hall, rain on the windows during a later review, even if the original day was bright, the smell of paper, dust, and warm plastic from a photocopier. These sensory details belong not only to the case, but to the people who kept working when answers did not come. In those rooms, the file would have had seasons, summer appeals, winter reviews, anniversaries in June, a new call, a new claim, a new disappointment. Cold cases do not remain emotionally frozen. They warm briefly whenever someone comes forward, then cool again if the lead fades. You can imagine that pattern across the years. A slow breathing of hope and quietness around the Trevaline case. Each time hope rose, practical questions followed. Where was this person in 1990? Can the sighting be placed? Does the date match? Is there a record, a witness, a receipt, a vehicle, a statement that supports it? Hope alone cannot enter the file as fact. It has to pass through checking. That checking may feel unromantic, but it protects the integrity of the search and the dignity of the missing. Dignity is a word worth keeping near. Trevaline's disappearance has the shape of a public mystery, but her life was not public property. The details we use should serve understanding, not curiosity for its own sake. The shop, the note, the sightings, the searches, the later reviews, all belong because they explain why the case went cold. They show the patient work and the limits of what could be known. As we move deeper, we can let the pace stay unhurried. Nothing here needs solving in a sudden rush. The case has already endured so many years that a few more quiet minutes of careful attention are more fitting than urgency. You can turn the next page slowly. You can let the paper settle flat. The words will wait. The old Saturday is not going anywhere now. The next page brings us again to witness memory, because that is where so much of the case rests. Witness memory is not a single thing. It is perception, attention, later recall, emotion, and context braided together. A person might remember Trevaline's manner clearly, but not the exact time. Another might remember a time because they had an appointment. Another might remember clothing because it caught the eye. Investigators had to gather all of that and build a careful frame. In the first hours, the frame would still have been flexible. A missing adult might return. A misunderstanding might clear. A family worry might become relief. As hours became days, the frame hardened into a more serious inquiry. You can feel that shift in any missing person case. The moment when ordinary explanations begin to fall away, and every earlier detail must be reweighed. The Trevaline case crossed that threshold quietly but firmly. Once that happened, the note changed meaning. At first, it was just a temporary notice. Later, it became a timestamp, a sign of intention, a central exhibit of the day's strangeness. The belongings changed meaning too. At first, they were merely things left in a shop. Later, they became a timestamp, a sign of intention, a central exhibit of the day's strangeness. The belongings changed meaning too. The officers in 1990 were working inside uncertainty, not inside the later story we now know. That does not mean every decision was perfect. It means we remember the conditions of the time: fewer cameras, different forensic capacity, slower communication, more reliance on paper, landline calls, and public appeals. A busy town with visitors, a landscape difficult to search completely, a missing woman whose last certain movements were brief and ordinary. Under those conditions, even careful work could fail to find the answer. Failure to solve is not always failure to care. That distinction matters in the Trevaline case. The house-to-house inquiries, vehicle checks, searches, and later reviews all show effort, yet effort did not produce resolution. Sometimes people find that hard to accept because we want care to be rewarded with certainty. Cold cases teach the harder lesson that care may have to continue without reward. Continuation has its own dignity. The case remains named. Appeals remain possible. Files remain available. People still speak of Trevaline with concern rather than forgetting her into a statistic. You can feel, perhaps, the quiet steadiness of that. It is not the answer the family deserved, but it is a form of keeping faith with the person who vanished. The file also invites us to think about the shop as a workplace. Workplaces hold rhythms outsiders may miss. Opening times, regular customers, stock arrangements, cash handling, lunch habits, closing routines. A disruption in a workplace can reveal itself through small practical irregularities. Detectives would have wanted to know what Trevaline usually did on Saturdays, when she might leave the shop, who she trusted, and whether the note fit her habits. If the note did fit her habits, then it may have seemed less alarming at first. A customer seeing it might simply return later. If it did not fit, someone might have noticed. Public information suggests the note became significant because she did not return, rather than because the act itself was wildly unusual. That nuance matters. The case does not begin with a dramatic sign. It begins with an ordinary courtesy that later became extraordinary. Ordinary courtesies can make the disappearance feel closer. Most listeners know what it is to step away for a moment and leave a promise behind. That familiarity makes the unanswered outcome harder, but it also makes the telling more human. You do not need to imagine danger to feel the weight of it. You only need to imagine a small shop waiting for its owner, and the light moving slowly across the floor. As afternoon became evening, the atmosphere around attic antiques would have changed. The practical problem of an unattended shop became something more worrying. People who expected Trevaline to return would have begun comparing times, calls, sightings, and assumptions. You can hear voices kept low, perhaps trying not to alarm one another too soon. Families and communities often move through that early uncertainty carefully, hoping not to name the worst possibility before they must. By the time the missing report was made, the case had already lost precious hours, though not through obvious neglect. It is simply the nature of adult missing cases that concern may build gradually. Adults have freedom. They can change plans. They can be delayed. They can leave notes. That ordinary freedom can slow the moment when absence becomes emergency. In Trevaline's case, the note itself may have reassured people at first, because it promised return. That is another reason the case went cold after the shop. The early signal was not alarm, but reassurance. Back in 2 minutes tells the world not to worry. It asks customers to wait or come back. It does not ask anyone to call police. By the time the sentence became troubling, the interval it described had expanded far beyond its original meaning. Time had opened, and evidence had begun to cool. You can feel the sadness in that transformation, but we keep it soft. There is no need to accuse the note of misleading anyone. It was only doing what it was written to do. Trevaline likely meant it sincerely. The world around it changed. That is the quiet tragedy of many cold case details. They become ominous only because of events they could not predict. The evening search would have belonged to a different sensory world than the morning. Cooler air, dimmer streets, the smell of river damp rising, shop windows reflecting lamps instead of sun, footsteps sounding clearer after business hours. You can imagine officers and locals moving through familiar places with unfamiliar attention, looking at lanes, doorways, banks, and paths as if they had been newly made strange. Search attention changes a landscape. A ditch becomes a place to check. A parked car becomes a question. A footpath becomes a possible route. A bin becomes a container of potential evidence. This altered seeing can be exhausting, because it asks the mind to treat the ordinary world as if it might be hiding an answer. In the Trevaline investigation, that altered seeing spread through town and countryside, then continued for years in memory. The longer a search goes without discovery, the more the mind widens. Perhaps she left by car with someone. Perhaps she walked farther than expected. Perhaps the sighting out of town was accurate. Perhaps it was not. Each possibility changes the search area and the type of evidence needed. You can see how quickly a small shop disappearance becomes a much larger inquiry, even when the known facts remain few. A person leaving with someone voluntarily, even briefly, would explain some movement, but not the abandoned belongings. A sudden accident would explain absence, but not necessarily the lack of trace. A planned disappearance would explain distance, but not the practical silence afterward. A stranger encounter would explain interruption, but requires evidence of contact beyond the incomplete sighting. Each theory touches the facts, then fails to cover them all. That is why the case remains unsettled, not because no explanation can be imagined, but because every imagined explanation leaves something outside its reach. The patient detective notices those leftovers. They are important. A theory that handles the note but ignores the car is too thin. A theory that handles the car but ignores the later sighting is incomplete. A theory that handles the sighting but ignores the lack of later activity still needs support. You can almost see the old corkboard, strings possible but not fixed. In a sleep script, we do not need to dramatize it with red thread and urgency. We can imagine instead a neat table, soft lamplight, and a pencil moving slowly from column to column. Known, unknown. Supports, does not support. The method is quieter and more truthful to the patient work that cold cases require. At this point in the file, fatigue may enter the room. Not only physical fatigue, but the mental weariness of circling the same unknown. Detectives are human. Families are human. Witnesses are human. Everyone can become tired of not knowing, yet the file waits without fatigue, holding the same facts as if time has not passed. That can feel both comforting and cruel. Comforting because the facts are still there. Cruel because they have not changed. The note still says 2 minutes. The car still remains in the record. The sightings still carry their grades of certainty. The searches still end without discovery. You can turn the pages in a new year, under a new light, and find the same old arrangement waiting. That is the texture of a cold case. But sometimes the unchanged arrangement is what allows a future change to be noticed. If a new statement arrives, it can be tested against the stable record. If a claim contradicts the known timeline, the contradiction can be seen. If a memory fits with a detail never widely publicized, that fit may matter. Cold case files are not only old paper, they are measuring instruments, kept ready. The Trevaline case's public details give only part of that instrument. Police may hold information never released, as investigators often do. That private knowledge can help test future claims. You and I should remember that the public story is not the whole file. There may be withheld details, eliminated names, confidential statements, and forensic notes we do not see. This is another reason to keep public conclusions modest. Modesty is not a lack of care. It is a way of staying aligned with truth. The story of Trevaline Evans deserves that. It deserves a voice that can say the case went cold because evidence thinned, because the era had limits, because sightings were uncertain, because no decisive trace was found, and because time passed without a breakthrough. That explanation is not as tidy as a single missed clue, but it may be closer to the real shape. Real shapes in cold cases are often uneven. One side is built from firm facts, another is made of memory, another from search geography, another from later review. The center may be empty. If you try to force it into symmetry, you lose what makes it real. So we let the Trevaline case remain uneven tonight, and we keep walking along its edges with care. As the night deepens around the telling, you may hear the old shop settling. Wood shifts softly, glass reflects the street. Somewhere in the imagined back room, paper lies flat on a desk. The note is not on the door now, but in memory, where it has been held too long. We are not there to disturb it. We are only there to understand why such a small message could become the hinge of a long unanswered case. And from that hinge, the file opens once more toward the people who tried to follow her path. Through streets, along water, across hillsides, and back again to the same quiet counter where the ordinary things were still waiting. Those ordinary things stayed behind, and the years gathered around them, with the patience of dust in a room nobody can quite leave. The Trevaline case remains unsolved to this day. Trevaline Evans has never been found. No one has been brought to court for her disappearance, and the file has stayed open in the quiet hope that some small remembered detail may still come home. You can hold that plainly now, without reaching for a sharper ending, because the truth of this case is that the answer never arrived in the way her family, her town, and the investigators needed it to arrive. So the shop remains in memory as a place of pause, not resolution. The note still speaks in its modest way, promising only a moment, while time stretches far beyond what those words were ever meant to carry. You can let the counter grow still now, with the keys where they were left, the handbag resting in the old light, and the glass of the door turning dark as evening settles over Church Street. Nothing more needs to be forced from the silence. And perhaps that is where we leave Trevaline tonight, not forgotten, not solved, but held gently in the careful language of those who kept looking. The river can keep moving through Llangollen, the hills can darken softly beyond the town, and the old file can rest where it is, still open, still waiting, while the room around you grows quiet enough for sleep.